You are listening to the Truth to Live By podcast, a ministry of Windward Baptist Church. To learn more about our church, you can check out our website at windwardbaptist.org.
All right, Colossians chapter 4, relationships. Okay, so I'll repeat the points, and we are on the last section of the chapter. So the points of this chapter, if you remember them, is be proportionate, be fair. If you are a boss, if you are in a position of authority, be nice to people. You know, if you're a coach, then don't show favoritism, treat everyone, put your effort and energy into everyone equally. If you're a boss, treat people fairly. Do you think it's fair, or if it's right, or is it even ethical or even moral for a CEO to make 472 times more money than your average worker in the same company? What do you think about that? Doesn't it sound weird? Does it? Do you know, I think that's the reason why. You ever listen to people that complain about capitalism? And they're against it, you know. They're more in favor of like a socialistic style of government, which I think it would be a tremendous disaster. But because of this, it breeds opportunities for that. Because they take this extreme and they'll say, you know, look at what these people are doing. We need a new system. It's not fair. And then it brings in socialism, which is all about control. And then when you have that, what do? They're going to try to get rid of spiritual things. And they're trying to secularize society, which is, you know, what the devil wants to do. But it'll take something like this, you know. And so when we have the opportunity, we need to be fair. You know, if you're in that kind of position. So be proportionate. Be in prayer. Reminder to us of the power of prayer and how effective prayer is. The Bible says the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And this Saturday we have a prayer meeting. And I appreciate Brother Robert praying for Israel. Sometimes we forget, and we need to be in prayer for Israel. We need to be in prayer for our country. So be in prayer. Think about your biggest problem, the biggest issue in your life today. Think about it for a second. The best way to deal with it is through prayer. The worst way to deal with it is through complaining about it. But how much would rather complain about it than pray about it? Don't raise your hand. So be proportionate, be in prayer, be productive. Be productive. In the world that we live in today, not just us that live in this world today, but imagine the young people who are brought up from when they're really young to they're trained to be on their phones, right? Or tablets, you know. And what does it do? It creates an unproductive society. Well, as Christians, Paul's saying, redeem the time. We don't have much time. Why do I feel like re-preaching this whole sermon? Be productive. Walk in wisdom toward them that are without, redeeming the time. Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that ye may know how ye ought to answer every man. It's not so much what to say, it's more important how to say it, right? A lot of times we're so concerned about what to say. It's more important how we say it, right? He says that ye may know how ye ought to answer every man. In fact, the Bible does say, be ready always, right, to give an answer to everyone that asks you the reason of the hope which is in you with meekness and fear. So be ready to give an answer. And when we give the answer, it's very important not just what we say, but how we say it. There's a lot of Christians or a lot of people that know the Bible really well. You know, they're very intellectual when it comes to studying the Scriptures and being an apologist. But sometimes it's not just what you know, But when you're in the discussion, it's how you say it. Because if we don't say it right, we might have the information, but it's not going to be received well. So be productive. And we'll be a lot more productive in our relationships if we say certain things the right way. And that's really where we want to be productive. Relationships is important to us. Then the last thing is be personal. And Paul had a personal relationship with a lot of these guys, and I was trying to finish the message with emphasizing that you could be a star athlete, you could be a very rich person. You ever heard the last words? I'm not 100% sure if this was his last words, but of Steve Jobs. If you've heard his last words. Oh, you heard his last words? Oh, you memorized it? But Steve Jobs' last words, the things that he was saying, it's kind of surprising. And he's the one that invented the iPhone. But then at the end of his life, he's basically saying, these things don't even matter. It's all about relationships. Be productive. Be personal. So now he's going to list a bunch of names. So I did start this. So with verse 7, we did verse 7 and 8, I believe. And then we'll finish with this is the last point, and this will take us to the end of the chapter as Paul concludes the book of Colossians. All my state shall Tychicus declare unto you, who is a beloved brother and a faithful minister and fellow servant in the Lord. I mean, this person was a beloved brother, a faithful minister, and a fellow servant in the Lord. And so he's the one who carried the letter. He delivered the letter to the church. And then it says, whom I have sent unto you for the same purpose, that he might know your estate and comfort your hearts. So he was going to bring them that letter that would be a help to them. And that's always a blessing to be the one that delivers the message. So don't shoot the messenger, right? With Onesimus, a faithful and beloved brother, who is one of you. So Onesimus was from Colossae, and he was a slave, or he ended up leaving Philemon. He was a runaway slave, and then Paul gets in contact with Onesimus, and then wins him to Christ. And then, of course, in the book of Philemon, which Paul writes from prison, that's a prison epistle, and he writes to Philemon saying that Onesimus, who ran away, and he may have wronged you. In fact, he may owe you, but whatever he owes you, put it on my account. And he says, and remember also that I led you to Christ, as I've also led Onesimus to Christ. So now we're all brothers in Christ. So treat him as a brother, not as a slave. And if he owes you anything, put it on my account. And then that's the story of Philemon, the book of Philemon. It's a very beautiful epistle. And of course, it pictures the fact that Jesus Christ is saying the same thing. It says, if someone has wronged you, put it on my account. In fact, there's a song about that. Would you like for me to sing the song? Put that on. No, I don't feel like singing it. It's a beautiful song. Like Onesimus who ran away, blah, blah, blah. Forget how it goes. And so that's what the book of Philemon is about. So this is Onesimus, a faithful and beloved brother who is one of you. They shall make known unto you all things which are done here. And then he says in verse 10, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, saluteth you, and Marcus, sister's son to Barnabas. And so he talks about this Marcus. So this guy, Marcus, was Barnabas' nephew. And how many know who Marcus is? Anybody know who Marcus is? You know. This is John Mark. So this guy, John Mark, he's the nephew to Barnabas. When Barnabas and Paul set out on the first missionary journey, they went out, and then he was somebody who was helping them. They were a missionary team, and they needed his help But then when things got difficult, what did he do? He left. He bailed out. So Paul was upset about that. Here's part of your team. He was the one that was helping in the ministry. There's a lot of things that have to be done when they're traveling and ministering, and so he was part of the team. He was very important, and yet he quit. He left. So then when they went back home to their headquarters in Antioch, then they're about to set off into the second missionary journey. And so Paul's talking to Barnabas. He says, "Okay, Barnabas, you ready to head out?" Barnabas said, "Yeah, I'm ready to head out. I'm going to go get my nephew." "Oh, which nephew? How many nephews do you have?" "One." He may have had more than one. But I'm talking about John Mark. "Oh, he's not coming with us." "Why not?" "He quit." No, but he's going to do better this time. I'm really wanting to take him under my wing and mentor him." And Paul said, "No ways." He said, "No way, Jose." Or he said, "Not even, brother." Or he said, "Forget him. He's not coming." "No, but this is my nephew. And I want you, just give him another chance. He's going to be fine." And Paul said, "No, he's not coming." He goes, "No, he should come." "Okay, I tell you what, Barnabas, you want him to come on a missionary journey? You take him and you go to do your own missionary journey. And I'm going to take Silas and we're going to go on our own missionary journey." And they split. And there's lessons to learn about that. So you would say, well, who was right in that argument? They're both right. Barnabas wanted to mentor John Mark, and he went, and they're able to cover more ground. Maybe that's what the Lord had wanted. Or even if that's not originally what the Lord had intended, but based upon their decision, he still used it. And now you had two missionary teams traveling, right? And we know that Paul did well. He had Silas. Now he mentored Silas, and he had a team of people. And then Barnabas, he mentored John Mark. And we know that John Mark did well. Because you know what his contribution is to Christianity? Do you know? Okay, not Robert. Not Robert. Not Mrs. Napunoa. What is John Mark's contribution to Christianity? Raise your hand. Do you know how to raise your hand, young lady? Gail, what is it, Gail? He wrote the book of Mark. John Mark writes the book of Mark in the Bible. And so you know that John Mark, he writes the book of Mark based on whose account? On Peter's account. Not that Peter, but the other Peter. But Peter knows that because his name is Peter. And so, now you don't have a book of Peter in the Gospels. It's not Matthew, Peter, Luke, John, right? It's Matthew, Mark. And so that's named after John Mark. But he doesn't use the name John because then there would have been two Johns. I don't know if that's the reason, but so it's called the book of Mark. But it is written by John Mark, who writes the book from Peter's perspective. So we see that it is a blessing that Barnabas took John Mark and mentored him. And Paul is humble enough to acknowledge that. In fact, like he said, he says here, he just says this, "And Marcus, sister's son, to Barnabas, touching whom ye received commandments. If he come unto you, receive him." But then at the end of his life, he goes to prison again. Like right now, he's in a Roman prison, and he's chained up, but he's able to have visitors. It's kind of like house arrest. He's able to. It's not as difficult of an imprisonment as the next one. So he's able to have visitors. Now, when he was in prison at the end of his life, he was in a dungeon where it was dark and damp and cold, and he was by himself. So when he was in that prison, he's asking Timothy to come visit him and to bring the scrolls with him. And he says, and also bring John Mark. And what does he say about John Mark at that time? He says, he is profitable unto me and the ministry. Was that Paul saying, hey, Barnabas, I'm glad you did what you did. Good job, Barnabas, because now look, he's a profitable servant. And you know, we may not be able to do certain things in our Christian life, but we may be mentoring someone that's going to take the baton and continue on the ministry in some ways that we may never even get to do. And so we know a lot about Barnabas, but just think about all the things that John Mark got to do in his traveling and all what he was able to do and experience as a Christian because of Barnabas. So he says, and Marcus, sister's son to Barnabas. And then he says in verse 11, and Jesus, which is called justice. Because this is not, obviously, this is not Jesus Christ he's mentioning. Because the name Jesus, it was a popular name in those days. This is the Greek version of the name Joshua. So in Hebrew, if you translate this from Hebrew, it's going to come up Joshua. And if you take the name Joshua and you translate it from Greek, it's going to be Jesus. So he says, which is called justice, because he wants to know that this is a different person. Who are of the circumcision. Now when it says that, who are of the circumcision, that means he's Jewish. Those that are of the circumcision, that's Jewish. Those that are of the uncircumcision, that's Gentiles. These only are my fellow workers unto the kingdom of God, which have been a comfort unto me. See, because Paul was such a tremendous minister, there were people that wanted to minister to him when he was in prison. And that's how we should live our life. Just investing in people, being a blessing to people, be nice to people, serve people, be kind to people, be generous to people. And then one day when you're in a bind, then they'll have an opportunity to give back to you. You know, I remember when we used to go to the nursing homes and minister, and there was a nursing home up on Huimana Road. There's different ones in Kahalu'u. Sometimes you're over there and there's people there that no one, you talk to the workers and they'll say, yeah, then there's some people here that hasn't had a visitor in a long, long time. And it's thinking, that's really sad. But then you sometimes wonder, why is that? I mean, I guess it could happen to anybody. But maybe they, I don't know. Down another one. So this Jesus who's called justice, I don't think we really know a whole lot about him. So I was thinking what we should do is just make something up. We don't know anything about him, so let's say that this is a guy who, when he met Paul and they were in the synagogue, and he didn't agree with Paul, so they got into this heated argument. And so then after, when they were walking away, he told people about Paul. Paul ended up getting arrested and getting beat up. And so later on, this guy ended up someone witnessed to him, and he became a Christian, and so now he loves Paul. And he said, sorry for what I did. That's justice. I just made that up. You can make up your own story. So we don't know anything about him, or maybe you can find something out about it. I wasn't able to. Anyway. Epaphras, who is one of you. So he is from Colossae. He is their pastor. He's the one that started the church. He got saved because of Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul was teaching in the school of Tyrannus when he was in Ephesus. This guy came there. He heard Apostle Paul teaching, and he ended up getting saved, and he ended up starting a church. And now he's pastoring that church, but he's concerned about the things that are going on. And so what he does is he goes to Apostle Paul and lets him know what's going on in the church, and then Paul writes the letter. So that's Epaphras, who is one of you, a servant of Christ. He saluteth you, always laboring fervently for you in prayers, that ye may stand perfect and complete in all the will of God. When was the last time we labored fervently? Can you think back to a time? I can think back to a time in our church where something had happened, and then you could feel the probably most intense prayers that I've ever heard from our church at a prayer meeting. There was 2 times it was like that. One time was, I won't say the circumstance, but someone was in Serious situation. And then the other time was after 9/11. Remember that? Was that on a Tuesday that happened? Or Monday or Tuesday? It wasn't on a Wednesday. But I remember we had a prayer meeting, right? And you could just feel the passion in people's prayers. So he was saying that this is someone that did that frequently, that he labored fervently for you in prayers, that you may stand perfect and complete in all the will of God. That he prays, that he labors in prayer for you. At some point in people's life, maybe you can't do certain things that you used to could do. Like I can't run marathons anymore. No, I never did. But if I did, I still probably wouldn't be able to, so what does it matter? But there's going to come a time where there's certain things. I was just working on the other day at 24-Hour Fitness, and I was bench pressing. I was bench pressing 405 for 10. No. No, but I was actually just doing 135, just a bar, and 45-pound plates. And so I was, nowadays when you warm up, it's so important. The first set is like torture. It's like torturing your body. Just everything hurts. And then the second set is a lot easier. The blood's flowing. It feels a lot easier. And so that's all I just did. 3 sets of just that. I didn't even go up. I don't have a spotter. I'm not going to go up. I'm not going to kill myself. I'm not going to push it too hard. No pain, no gain, right? Well, my friend's motto is no pain, no pain. So I follow that now. But anyway, I'm doing the 135, and I'm looking back, like, how long have I been coming to this gym? I'm thinking, man, it's been years. And I remember sometimes doing a lot heavier weight and being the equivalent of what I'm doing now, feeling the same, and the weight was a whole lot more. I was like, wow, we just got weaker, so weak compared to before. And then comes a day where that there are some people, and I was watching this one guy, he was walking around, and he was having a hard time just walking. And, you get older. You can't do what you used to do physically. But you know what you can always do? Pray. And it's probably the most effective thing you can do is pray. I think at the end of our life, God has us, he narrows things down to where, you know what? You ever heard someone say, well, all I can do is pray? You know what? That's the most you can do too. That's the least and the most. Isn't that amazing? There's this one pastor, and this person had asked him, he said, I'm crippled, I can't do anything. And he says, you know what? You're confined to a chair. He says, but you're confined to that chair so you can spend time in prayer. And it was like a rhyme. So the person would keep saying it to himself. I'm confined to this chair so I can spend time in prayer. And you're still able to be a very effective minister by praying. And so he brings that up. This guy laboring fervently for you in prayers that you may stand perfect and complete in all the will of God. That his prayers is helping you to stand perfect and complete in all the will of God. For I bear him record that he hath a great zeal for you, and them in Laodicea, and them in Hierapolis. Luke, the beloved physician. Isn't it funny when you preach expository? Like if you're not preaching expository, you probably wouldn't go over all these verses, right? But because you do, and then and sometimes you see these little bits of information that you just you guys know that Luke was a doctor, right? Luke was a physician. You guys heard that before, Dr. Luke? Do you know how we know he's a doctor? Do you know how we know? Huh? The Bible, where? Where in the Bible? No, right here. This is how you know. Did you know that? This is the only place that tells us that Luke was a doctor. Luke, the beloved physician. See, you learned something in case they ask you that on Jeopardy or something. He says, Luke, the beloved physician, and Demas greet you. So we know that. Does anybody know anything about Demas? Raise your hand if you know anything about Demas. Come on. Rock. Demas has forsaken Paul, having loved this present world. Now, I bet Demas did probably a lot of good things. In fact, he's mentioned in Philemon. Philemon. He's mentioned somewhere in Philemon, right? In Philemon, can't find Philemon. I don't think my Bible has Philemon. Oh, there it is. Somewhere in Philemon he's mentioned. Oh, yeah. Marcus, Aristarchus, Demas, Lucas, my fellow laborers. So he's mentioned there in a positive way, as with all these other names. And of course, John Mark's there too. And Demas, fellow laborers. He's mentioned here. He's mentioned as a fellow laborers, and he's mentioned here as just Demas says, "What's up?" So he's mentioned as a fellow laborer. He's mentioned as, Demas says hi. And then the next time he's mentioned, he has forsaken me, having loved this present world. So, he was a faithful servant. He was just somebody that, he was a greeter. He's someone that, just went, "Hey, what's up, everybody?" And then now, he forsook Paul because he loved this present world. And yet, he might have been a great person, a great servant. But we'll always remember Demas is someone that forsook the team, right? You're usually going to be remembered for the last thing that you did. What does that tell us? We got to go down swinging. We got to serve the Lord to the very end. Imagine if you served the Lord and you were very faithful, and at the very end of your life you sinned against God. You're going to be remembered for that. And that's what Demas, he's mentioned here, and then he's remembered as someone that loved the world. But he doesn't say anything positive here. He's just Demas says hi. Verse 15, salute the brethren which are in Laodicea and Nymphis. It's an interesting name. Do you think that Nymphis was a male or female? Nobody knows. And the church which is in his house. So, I guess he's a male. And when this epistle is read among you, cause it to be read also in the church of the Laodiceans, that ye likewise read the epistle from Laodicea. So I think when it says in his house, it's the brethren, because it says the brethren and Nymphis. So I was reading something about the breakdown of the name, which was an interesting history to it. Anyway, but when it says a church when they had church back then, they didn't have church buildings. The church buildings really, people don't realize this, but they really didn't start. There really wasn't church buildings until Constantine. But they had church wherever they could find a place to meet. It could be in someone's house. It could be in, it could be in just a room. It could be in a warehouse. It could be outside. If you remember I guess it's Constantine. But if you remember in my office, there's a picture of these Christians that were from Ukraine that were meeting outside in the snow. And they're having church. And they're worshiping. Church is not about the building. Nowadays, it's so important, the building. And it's good to have a building. But that's not the church. Sometimes we'll say we'll go to the church house, right? Or we'll go to church. But from him on, then you had you had church. But really, when you think about it, your house, if you're like a husband, your children, that's your church. The people that you're associated with, you could. I'm not saying it's a church like how we have pastors and a deacon and I take up the offering, but you have the people that you're over. The church is in your house, your area of influence, and so we got to remember that. And when this epistle is read among you, which means that this epistle is meant to be read in the church and studied, and this is why we studied it, and we're just about finished, cause that it be read also in the church of the Laodiceans, and that ye likewise read the epistle from Laodicea. And back then, all the churches met in people's houses. But does that mean you have to have it in someone's house? Because there are some people that believe that it's wrong to have it in a church building. You have to have it in a house. Otherwise, you're not being biblical. No, it's just that's how they did it back then. It doesn't mean you have to do it that way. And say to Archippus, take heed to the ministry which thou hast received in the Lord, that thou fulfill it. Which we learn some things about ministry, that God gives ministry to his people. And true ministry is received in the Lord. Also, a ministry may be left unfulfilled. Someone may be called to do something and they don't do it. One time I met someone who had a good career, then they ended up getting kind of crippled up. They were crippled up. And they had to retire from their career. Had a great career. But when you talk to them, they said that they had a good career, but God called them to do something different, and they never did it. And they've always regretted not becoming what God called them to do, and that was a pastor. But the person didn't become a pastor, became a firefighter instead, and even became a fire. Did I say police? Fire, yeah. And they even became a fire chief, that's a high rank. But said that's not what God called them to do. And they regret not doing it. So ministry may be left unfulfilled. Because he says that. He's saying, take heed to the ministry that you received and fulfill it. Do what you're called to do. One must take heed to their ministry in order for it to be fulfilled. Take heed. Take it serious. Put your heart into it. And then we should also encourage others to fulfill their ministry. You know, when you're discipling someone or when you're working with people, we got to encourage them to ask the Lord, what is it that the Lord wants you to do with your life? And do it. And you just think about, I remember in the days when Tiffany, not this Tiffany, but the Tiffany Haggett, but she's actually Tiffany Hefner. Now she's Tiffany Kopiak. When she became a nurse, and she was thinking about what she's going to do with her, with her nursing degree. She just became an official registered nurse, and thinking about where she's going to be a nurse at, what places need nurses. Of course, if you're a nurse, you can just about go anywhere. There's a need for nurses everywhere. And she was praying about it, and then these missionaries came and was seeing because they would come to the school, because it was a Christian school, say if there's anybody that's willing to use their skills as a nurse on the mission field for a year, because they need nurses. And so she said, yeah, I think that's what the Lord wants me to do. And she went and did that. There were some people that thought that that's a waste of your ability. You could be making a lot of money as a nurse, but you're going to go on a mission field and you're not going to meet. In fact, she had to raise support to do this. And yet she still did it. And then now look what the Lord is doing with her and through her on the mission field. That's a blessing. And then, of course, she ended up marrying somebody from Papua New Guinea. And she's, they have a tremendous ministry. And one day I would like to go there and see it. That would be pretty awesome. And that's a blessing. She's a nurse. Yes, she could be making a lot of money in, being a nurse. But that wasn't the point. The point is, what does God want you to do? Nothing wrong with making a lot of money, but what does God want you to do? And we should encourage others to fulfill their ministry. We should encourage our children to fulfill their ministry, whatever the Lord has called them to do. And then verse 18, the salutation by the hand of me, Paul, remember my bonds, grace be with you, amen. And as was custom in that day, Paul generally dictated his letters and personally signed a postscript with his own hand. So he had someone else write it, but then he also signed it. Can you imagine having Paul's signature? Ever ask somebody for their autograph? Imagine if you had Paul's autograph. So he signed it. He dictated the letter, and these people wrote it, and he signed it. He says, remember my chains. There is much emotion, sorrow, and strain in this simple phrase. Paul not only knew the confinement and loneliness of the prisoner, He also had the uncertainty of not knowing if his case before Caesar's court would end with his execution. And of course, it didn't at that time. He was released and he traveled again, but he was arrested again and he went to prison again, and then he got executed. And what does he say in his last words? He says, as we look at 2 Timothy chapter 4. I'll read the one where he says about Demas. For Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world. But he says this. He's about to be executed. He's about to have his head chopped off. I'm at church. I'm standing on the stage right here. 47528 Kamehameha Highway. You okay, Robert? 2 Timothy chapter 4. No, I know, I was just joking. 2 Timothy chapter 4 is Paul's last. This chapter is Paul's last words. He says, for I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. By the way, Christianity is a battle. Sometimes people think, I'm a Christian, and why is it so difficult? Because it's warfare. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. We talked about that this morning, that in the Christian life, the best is yet to come, right? He's in prison. He's going to die, and things are going to improve for him, right? Henceforth, there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day. It only really matters what God thinks, right? You might have enemies. You might have people that disagree with you. We might have people that oppose us. But it only really matters what God says. Which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but unto all them also that love his appearing. So that would be all those that love his appearing. Are you looking forward to the second coming of Jesus? You know, there are some people that when Jesus comes, that's not going to be a good time for them because they're going to go through the tribulation period. But if you're saved and Jesus comes again, we'll be raptured. What about all the people that's going to be left behind? We got to tell them now. Do thy diligence to come shortly unto me. I would ask Demas, but he forsaken me, having loved this present world. Only Luke is with me. Take Mark and bring him with thee, for he is profitable to me for the ministry. And that's his last words. And that is the end of Colossians chapter 4. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes?
You have been listening to our Truth to Live By podcast, a ministry of Windward Baptist Church. This podcast is supported by the gifts and donations of its listeners. You can make a secure donation through our website at windwardbaptist.org.